Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of StarrCast podcast, where we talk all things wellness, especially as pertains to the wellness business. Today, we have an exotic guest. I'm so excited to have him on. We are welcoming Ramy Elnagar. He is a well-being innovation strategist and the founder of White Mirror Studio. And we're going to talk about what Ramy's work is because it's fascinating. Thank you again for joining us, Ramy.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So our paths crossed originally at Global Wellness, although it was so crazy there, we never actually got to have a meeting. But you have sort of, it feels like you have burst onto the wellness scene. It probably doesn't feel like that for you because it's been years in the making. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your career path, if you were? I know you are a Lebanese person. I know you live in the UK. I don't know how you got into the work you're in now, and we would love to hear that story.
Absolutely. It's true. We've never really met in person, even though we've crossed paths so many times.
Yes.
If I go back to my Lebanese heritage, I would say I started my journey with a series of frustrations. I was very frustrated with the environment I grew up in because it never really took care of us. We had to deal with a lot of friction, a lot more than many countries in the world have to. And I really send a lot of my love to what's happening there at the moment. And I got into advertising thinking I will turn my creativity into something that will influence millions of people. And then
Mm,
5 years later, realized quickly that my creativity was being utilized to sell a product or a piece of content. So I got into technology thinking technology might be the answer to help millions of people feel good and connect to themselves. And the naivete of a man in his 20s, but realizing again, technology is absolutely worse, probably.
optimism. Let's call it optimism, not
Yeah.
naivete.
Naive optimism, I would say. And I ended up opening a virtual reality, augmented reality, and AI studio called Somewhere Else. And there was a project that really came close to me, which was called the Body Swap. And the Body Swap was this project that allowed a mental health practitioner to work with a suicidal patient. And that virtual patient would speak to you. And then you would switch bodies with that patient. And
That's
you would quickly realize,
fascinating.
why am I avoiding eye contact? Why am I calling them
Mhm.
sick? Why am I? So you start seeing the difference between the theoretical practice that you have and the reality of it. And the idea was to bridge the gap between that so that by the time you get to the real patient, you know how to deal with it. You know what you look like in their eyes. And that project was my first impact project. And I was very touched by it. But then we
Was
took a
it
turn because
successful, Ramy? Did it really help open the eyes of the therapists?
I would say so. We did a second version of it years later with another studio and the palliative care unit in hospitals. And it was helping doctors understand what is care for a terminally ill patient and how do you not traumatize their family as well if you're giving news, because care is a much more holistic word. And so I
Mhm.
was deployed in a few hospitals. I'll be honest with you, I didn't follow from there because we built it, we handed it to them. It was utilized in a few hospitals and then we left it there. Just doing an impact project for me was such a different experience as a creative, as a strategist, as an innovation designer, to genuinely see people be touched, that I set up in the end White Mirror where I am now. Because I felt that if you infuse technology, if you infuse space, if you infuse experience with a layer of intention, I think it can go a much longer way, hence the name White Mirror.
Well, what does that name mean? Can you drill down into that for us?
I was at iSpa this week and I started my talk with a video of the various polycrises that we're living in at the moment. And it was a pretty depressing montage to go through just the last 4 months of 2026. And I was sharing that underneath these polycrises, there's even more of something more subtle, more intimate, a collective meaning crisis. Many of us are having a hard time gearing our lives towards something genuinely meaningful. And to me, when you watch a series like Black Mirror, when you watch all these technologies being used in a very quasi dystopian way, a
Mm.
lot of it is pretty rooted in our reality at the moment. So we're not avoiding that future, we're living in it. It's just not as hyperbolic as what we see in the show. And I believe that the way out of that is spaces that take care of us, is technologies that are not extractive but that heal us, is that balance between longevity, spirituality. It's really playing with the tensions and the well-being space. And for me, that's what the white mirror is. It's not just an optimism or blind optimism to change our relationship to the world, but it's about infusing spaces and technologies with intention. And what I mean by that is when you build a product or when you design a space, on top of profitability and design, we should ask the question, am I helping people feel good? Physically,
Mm,
emotionally, spiritually, socially, all the layers of wellness.
mhm.
And even just considering one facet of that, to me, goes a really, really long way.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I'd like to ask more about your childhood. You mentioned that you were a creative person. Like, at what age did you realize that, and how did it manifest itself?
It took a long while. I think growing up in Lebanon, I was from a classic traditional family, and the idea was to go into business school and to open a business. So creativity was not a big part of our family lifestyle and conversation. But it was genuinely thanks to a lot of travel that I was exposed to the world. Psychedelia played a role in my life. I was very influenced by the 60s heroes in the United States, beat poets, music. And so when I did my business school, I graduated and then I was about to do an MBA. And then I took a big turn and went to art school. And then there I learned how to dress. I learned how to understand the creative process. I learned how to design projects that were purely about creativity itself and not necessarily about like a commercial outcome behind it. So that was absolutely the Central St. Martin's school was amazing
Oh,
for
you
me.
went to
And
Central
even
St. Martin's. Wow. Well, that's quite a switch from business school. How did your family respond to that?
between you and me, they didn't know for the first 2 years.
That's fabulous.
I told them years later when the studio was doing well and successful, but at that point, they thought I was doing an MBA. I didn't want to
Goodness.
disappoint, wasn't ready to share. I brought a virtual reality headset back home once, and it was fascinating to see different reactions in the family from loving it to imagining the possibilities to like, I don't want to even touch it. Uh, but now, obviously, they understand that the studio is an impact studio, and still the word impact to them is quite blurred. But yeah.
So you went into this creative field and as one would, goes into marketing, work with agencies. That is the career path. You decided you didn't like that. I'm curious about how you got the wellness influence came into your work.
I think it started more from my social circles. So I was always lucky to find myself in interesting social circles. And they can be very experimental circles, technological circles, psychedelic circles. And I got into quite spiritual social circles. And back to that point of how frustration guided my career, I was very frustrated in those circles because there was a lot of spiritual materialism. Think Tulum, Ibiza, but back in the early 2000s. So before they went through the circles of and you saw people that dressed in a certain way, put on their kimonos, their crystals, and there was that spiritual materialism. But then the narcissism and the social structures were still the same as toxic as other circles that you would see. And so I thought I misunderstood spirituality itself, but I saw circles that were just being very spiritually materialistic. You know, my guru is better than yours. My crystal is bigger than yours. I'm more performative than you are. And so when I first got my first wellness project with Tom, my previous business partner, we ended up working with Calm, the app, and he was producing music for them. And I met a neuroscientist in Lisbon who just finished his Horizon 2020 fund. He had a big room full of equipment, brain activity, heart rate, galvanic skin, and he wasn't sure what to do with it. And I'm like, why don't we open the lab? And so between Calm coming in and the lab coming in at the same time, we started studying music psychology principles to improve the design of the way we deliver functional soundscapes. And we delivered the first sleep content for Calm. It was quite successful. And then from there, we started doing more and more music. And music is a big heritage, both for me and for Tom, because when you marry neuroscience informed design and you bring music psychology principles on one side, and then you brief composers, so you bridge that gap between the neuroaesthetics world and the musical world, then on one level, you're helping translate the intuition of the composer because composers know what they're doing. They When a DJ
Mm.
DJs, they make thousands of people jump up and down at the same time. So they know what they're doing. They just don't know what rhythmic entrainment means. And so that translational work was amazing. And yeah, and then Calm became our main first client. And then from there, we started growing into the field. But I never planned to be in the well-being space. It just happened very accidentally.
Well, that's best part of the story. So many of us that work in wellness that are listening didn't plan it either. We just ended up here, and I always love to hear about the journey that took you there. And so for you, it was the good fortune of connecting with someone at Calm who was trying to also be in this space. I'm interested that music was the root, like the musical part. You know, how was it that I mean, I guess because Calm is an audio mean that you would have to do something that you listen to, but I love that music played a role in it. How did that come about?
So Tom Middleton is a wonderful composer. He has an amazing career in electronic music in the 90s. And then he pivoted into what we call functional soundscapes. So soundscapes that have a very clear effect on your psychophysiology. And so when we met at a sleep conference and we were both in the back of the room, again, frustrated with what we were seeing because we felt it was very veneer, it was very superficial. Science didn't really have a very serious role in that space. And, we've gone a long way as an industry since. I think COVID helped catalyze a lot of it. And we both shared
Mm.
this passion of bridging arts and science. It's a big thing for us. And so even in all of our projects, you'll always notice that our design process brings in a researcher, brings in an artist, brings in a technologist, because the more facets we bring into our design and the more voices we find ourselves being that rubber band between them. Because our design methodology changes from project to project. But the most
I would
important thing
imagine it would have to. I mean, they're all so different, right?
exactly. But it's important to get clients to really understand why these voices have to be brought into the design table. Because most often you'll have technologists building technology products for people, and that misses all the other lenses of design that exist in that space. And so we try to bring as many diverse voices into
Can
the
you
table.
say that again, Ramy? You're breaking up on me. You talked about the people coming into the room.
Yeah. So we try as much as, am I glitching still?
You're still breaking up. Give it a second. Maybe, yeah, let's just wait 10 seconds. Okay, now I see you again. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I told you the best Western might be a little bit
Yes.
glitchy. So do forgive me. We try as much as we can to bring a diverse cast of voices in our design process with our clients because we feel that you need the
Mhm.
technologist, the artist, the scientist all around the same table to really paint that holistic notion of well-being. Because even with music, a neuroscientist sees music in a very different way than a musician, and a technologist thinks about the spatial layout of how music's delivered in the space. So all of these layers make it that you can be very present in this deep listening experience, but you need all of these components in the same room. And more in the last
Mhm.
2 to 3 years, we're starting to involve ritual designers and people from spiritual practices to bring that spiritual component to design.
What is a ritual designer?
It's an individual who tries to understand, based on a lot of literature and also their own experience as a practitioner, how do you transform a very unfamiliar space into, I'm not going to use the word sacred space because it's a
Mhm.
big word, but into a very intentional space that is ripe for transformation. So, like, you can go inside and suddenly this space you've never gone into has certain components of like onboarding the individual, allowing them to understand the mindset they need to be in and what role they play in the ritual itself, then designing the ritual and then the offboarding. So, when you leave, what is the integration process so that you internalize as much of that transformation as you can? And that's really a very specific kind of practice, I would say. And no one really walks around with the title of ritual designers, but they tend to be very intuitive people that have the understanding.
That's fascinating. Can you speak more on the components of a physical space that work to catalyze transformation? What have you found is helpful?
Yeah, that was the theme of my talk at iSpa this week. It was about how do you step into the age of transformation. The example I gave was imagine you shift from function, here's a bed to sleep on, to form, here's a beautiful bedroom to sleep in, to transformation, here's an experience that will not only give you a good night's sleep, but will help you understand how to become a better sleeper. Or another example is function. Here's a sauna to sweat in. Form. Here's a beautiful thermal facility. To transformation. Here's an experience that will give you an understanding of your own nervous system. And to give you an example, we've been working with Therma Group for the last 5 years as their innovation sort of design partner. And we imagine with them what is the evolution of a thermal space from a space of relaxation to a deep sanctuary of introspection. And in collaboration with the amazingly named team called Marshmallow Laser Feast, which if you ever spend $100,000 on branding, always remember there's a team called Marshmallow Laser Feast, and they are amazing.
Okay.
So the team went to the Amazonian rainforest and they scanned these amazing trees called the Lupuna trees. And we brought it back to the German spa. And so as a guest, you walk in, you find yourself in your robe or you're in Germany naked and you go
Mm.
inside water, you're submerged, you've got spatial sound of animals and trees surrounding you. You lay down on these custom designed lily pads, there's rain, and you're going through this 24-hour experience of a tree. There's a tree above you, and we allow you to go inside that tree. And what's amazing in this experience is you don't just do a forest bathing experience. You're feeling the texture of the tree, you're understanding its seasonality, you're really embodying it. And so when we did the research afterwards, we tested brain activity, heart rate, bionic skin, and the list goes on. And what's fascinating is beyond just the positive biometrics, so people felt more relaxed, the brain was in a meditative state, lower heart rate, lower breathing rate. We then had a beautiful scene in the end of this flower that blooms called the Queen of the Night, that
Mm.
blooms once a year and it dies. So it's a story of death, of ephemerality. And you see people outside having this profound conversation about why am I not taking my kids into the outdoors? Why am I not seeing this incredible mystery of nature? And so the transformation here is not just the psychophysiological well being, which is the minimum we need to have. But afterwards, we saw that people were rating their nature connectedness score and they felt more connected to nature. And
Mm.
on an anecdotal level, they were saying that they want to alter the lifestyle, to start spending more time in the outdoors. So to me, an experience like this, which is an experience at a spa, goes beyond relaxation to transformation because it's aiming to shape an aspect of your behavior. And in this case, your predisposition to go outside and spend time in the outdoors. And you often get these, I would say, silly questions, not to belittle anybody, but about technology versus nature. And for me, the question needs to absolutely be technology and nature because
Mhm.
the two can complement each other. And when technology is infused with intention, it brings people to nature. And so that for me is an example of how transformation can work from a point of view of experience.
That's a great point that you make. Like, don't throw the technology away, but use it to bring in the elements of nature that you might want to, or any number of other experiences that can be enabled by the technology. It's wonderful that you were invited to give that talk at iSpa about what to do beyond the treatment room. What we are always striving for transformation with guests, right? They need to come and they don't just have a facial or a massage. They need to feel different when they leave, or they may question, "What was that about?" Like, "I had a nice time. I spent $175. I got a massage. It felt good. But if I feel the same when I leave, was it really worth it just for the 60 or 90 minutes?" People want to feel different when they leave and that lasts a little bit longer, right? That's the idea of transformation. So for spas listening, what kind of things can we do? Is it in the treatment room? Is it in the process of the whole visit? Like, what's your recommendation?
The third section of my talk was about small learnings that we saw in the briefs in the last 12 to 18 months. And I started by saying that we need to move the wellness proposition beyond the spa. And that can touch every single touch point in the guest journey. Think of when you arrive to a hotel. If you're asked, where are you flying from? I came from Los Angeles to London. If you opt in to agree that I'd love some support on my jet lag, it's easy for a staff member to look up when should a person go to bed based on the time zone. And you can tell me, hey, stay up for 2 or 3 hours. If you go to bed now, there's a good chance you will wake up at 3 in the morning.
Mm.
And At that point, all the amenities are fluffy because if I am underslept, your best sauna will do nothing for me. And
Uh-huh.
equally, is there an aspect of the amenities that can go beyond relaxation again? So we designed a sound sauna last year. And you can say, every sauna has a speaker, more or less, but that was not just the little Bose speaker that you see at the top. It was a sauna that embraces sound deeply. So sound is at the forefront of the experience. And you go inside, you've got these big speakers that are hidden behind the panels, and you close your eyes and you're having this full body deep listening experience. You're not allowed to speak. And most people, especially in hot saunas, cannot do the 3 time cycles of 20 minutes. You go in the sauna, you start staring at the hot timer, and you're like, please, I need to go out. And
When
so
am
you're
I
not
out of
getting,
here?
exactly. And so you're not getting the benefits of the contrast base. And so if you're having this deep listening experience, we're now studying, can we make you stay longer so that when you leave our facility, you understand what it's like to properly contrast bathe because we took the time to teach you. And then the sound experience is there to really anchor you in the space. Because if you go to a Japanese listening cafe, you're not allowed to speak. There's a beautiful record, an amazing sound system, and you don't speak for an hour or an hour and a half. And how often do you get offered as a guest to be in silence, embodied, quiet? And that
True,
for
not
me,
that often.
it's another example of like how if you come to us and you do this for 2 or 3 days, I believe this will shift your sensorial perception of yourself because you learned in this hotel to stay for 2 or 3 days in silence, feeling everything that's moving in your body and feeling all the sound that's moving around you. So yeah, they're both saunas, but one is more intentional than the other.
I was fortunate to do a deep listening session similar to that at Ferrisbad in Norway with Lasse Eriksen, and we went into the sauna, and then he played jazz music, and, we no speaking, we just listened, and it was long, but you're right, it sort of performs the function of the Aufguss, which is originally developed to keep people in the sauna longer.
Exactly.
You have a reason and you have a way to focus your brain on the sound of the music, and then you don't think so much about the environment that you're in, and your brain takes you somewhere.
Absolutely. And there's a few other components. Like if you think about the bedroom is an amazing operating system for well-being. And you can have a good night's sleep based on the amenities that are designed in the space, like the space I'm in right now. Or we can say we'd like to go a step further, asking how can a bedroom help you become a better sleeper? And so is there a way to
Mm.
educate guests when they're in the bedroom about the sensory design in the space? Like, for instance, if I come to a hotel and I see that they have circadian lighting, or when I go to bed in the evening and I would love to use the shower and I come out and there's a red light below the bed because it's not spiking the cortisol reaction, it's allowing the melatonin to continue. Then I go home and I look at my bedroom and I'm like, why do I have white lights that spike my cortisol? Because they took the time to teach me a little bit about my environment, and not just to market what they did, but to share the knowledge of what they learned as they were designing these very intentional spaces. Same like when you go into a bedroom and you sleep there, there's something called the first night effect. And the first night effect is when your brain keeps you half awake in a new space. Because
Well, we've
from
all
an
felt that. You just don't sleep that well on the first night,
That's
right?
it. Because from an evolutionary standpoint, your brain is going cheetah, cheetah. There's a predator in the area because you never slept in this treehouse or in this cave. And so, is there a ritual that we can teach people on the first night they arrive to make a very unfamiliar space feel a little bit more familiar, so they can sleep a little bit more deep? And then when they go to other hotels, they might continue this ritual and they'll think about our hotel because we took the time to transform an aspect of their sleep. And so the big question for me on all of this in hospitality, in spas, even in the out of category, like we've done automotive projects where we try to shift from a smart vehicle to a thoughtful vehicle. Because every environment is an opportunity to help people feel good. Doesn't need to be a real estate sort of environment. But it's always about like how can I go a step further to shift the perception for you, to give you an aha moment, for you to go home and say, I learned something in the space. And if you leave the space transformed from when you entered it, that's a really good design challenge for ourselves to go beyond just the minimum of like, no, you feel good. No, we need to go a little bit higher. We transformed something about you.
That's wonderful. That's what we're after. Education and transformation. So teaching people how to do it better for themselves. Ramy, I know you've said that you have a problem with wellness as a concept because you feel that it is a limiting word. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you're taking me back to my marketing days when we were sitting down to think of the White Mirror website and like, what word should we use? We tried to work with the word human flourishing because it felt more joy centric. And if you think about wellness, it has its limitations in many ways. It's been utilized, it's been well washed. Longevity is going through a similar process at the moment. We sat down a few weeks ago talking about the etymology of the word clinic. Like, why do
Mm.
we use the word clinic? Clinic means there's something like a pathology, but aging is not a pathology. So when you go to a clinic to deal with your aging, automatically the psychological priming is I've got a problem to fix.
Right, it
That's what,
sounds medical.
and it is, which that's a whole different bucket of conversation, of course. But it's really important to think about the psychological priming. If you think about the biological age, I received mine last month for the first time and I resisted doing it for a while, probably because I thought I was going to be much older than I am,
Oh,
given
you
all
you do have an old soul. Did it come out like you thought it would?
surprisingly younger, which I told them, look, either way, it's not helping me. If you tell me I'm older, it's very debilitating. If you tell me I'm younger, it's a problem because I'm going to start doing things I shouldn't be doing. But even the way you deliver someone's biological age for me is so important because you need to understand the context in which this is delivered to you. Otherwise, there's a certain performance anxiety that comes with it. There's a term that I love called orthosomnia.
Orthosomnia?
And orthosomnia is this notion that you go to bed and you wake up in the morning and you have an Oura ring and you run to grab your phone. You're like, oh, why am I not sleeping well enough? So it creates that sleep performance anxiety. And so I think when it comes to concepts like wellness, like longevity, and our relationship to the data points that they give us, we need to be very careful about the space that we hold for people to understand that data because it could be very debilitating for them if it's delivered in a very like clinical fashion. This is your problem, and
Sorry,
this is
say again about the data you cut out after that.
am I. I'm sorry. I apologize on the budget connection. Where do you want me to come back from?
You said about the data.
I think when you think about the data points that we receive from the spaces of longevity, the spaces of wellness, we need to be very careful about how we deliver it to people because the psychology in which you receive it might be very debilitating to you if your biological age or your matrices are not where they're meant to be. And that's the difference between an Oura ring, for instance, that helps me go, wow, I get what's happening during my day, and an Oura ring that delivers, hey, you're not sleeping well. And then you become obsessive, and suddenly you're living in another problem, which is not only sleep, but sleep performance anxiety. So we need to think about the language, need to think about the way we contextualize the information.
True. We have these wearables, we all have them, and we look at our data, and then you get anxiety about whether last night wasn't as good as the night before, or how many steps have I walked. And then you get so wrapped around the data that you forget the point of it is just, to move your body when you're supposed to and to rest as you are supposed to. But we are become sort of victims of our own data sets, haven't we?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to try to balance hard wellness with soft wellness in the sense of like for every hyperbaric chamber, we need to have a ritual. For every clinic, we should have a spiritual sound space. It's always
Mhm.
nice to balance the two because as humans, we are that left and right brain. And we need to find a way to always provide both propositions. Even when you think about the term longevity strategy in a very um, reductionist fashion has become this cure of longevity technologies. I'm going to get a hyperbaric and a red light and that's it. And look, that is a part of it, the curation of technology. But to me, the philosophy is as important. Like when you step in as an individual, can you show me that I am really that balance between medical and spiritual? So that when I go home, I'm thinking in both lenses at the same time. Yes, I'll do my hyperbarics, but I'll also make sure that I start my day with a very joyous ritual that allows me to connect deeper to myself before I go and I grab my phone. And Jay Shetty spoke about that at iSpa. He talked about thankfulness, but in a very beautiful, profound way, because there's so much research around thankfulness. And when you're thankful and you're embodying that thankfulness, it's a very easy way to push out all inner thoughts and anxieties, because the only sense and the only thought you're with is, I'm very grateful to what I'm experiencing. And I saw this in a few practitioners I've met the last few months, where when they build a protocol for peak performance, there is the classic technologies that you're after, but there's also more and more these thankfulness meditations that they're asking their peak performers to do, because the research is showing that when you're sitting down and not just meditating to clear your mind, but being thankful, it changes your psychophysiology, you know? And yeah, so for every ritual, a hyperbaric, for every clinic, a spiritual space. Let's try to always yin to yang, because we are those two things at the same time as human beings.
It makes me think about the word longevity, which you mentioned. It's such a hot word right now, and we've been talking about it so much. Many of my podcast guests have brought it up. I mean, how we all want longevity, right? We want health span. We want to live longer. Well, and there's so many businesses now that are focused on we're longevity and we have this ingredient and this piece of equipment. And I'm asking myself, well, how will we know if they're right? We have to come back in 50 years and see what our measurements are to know if it's working. We don't even know, and yet we're so wrapped up in that.
Absolutely. It's a tricky one, and I don't have the answer for it. But the only thing I will say is we were invited last month to Antarctica, which was a beautiful experience to be in the edge of the world. And there were
Amazing.
a variety of different longevity scientists, practitioners. Dave Asprey was on the boat giving a talk. And there's a whole range of philosophies, a whole range of practices, from stem cells to biohacking. And what was beautifully surprising is I went in with, I'm going to learn on the science of longevity, and no one will ever mention anything spiritual, or even the word embodied will never be even remotely discussed. And a lot of these practitioners were quite the balance between the two, because I feel that somehow, because when you get so deep into the human body, you kind of start seeing the wonders of it. And it's a very awe-inducing experience to see this very connected system that is the human being. And many of them were pushing for one main idea, which was, we need to help people think for themselves. There's nothing called an average treatment, because you can be on that bell curve, and what works for you works for you. And so all of them were saying, look, I am a researcher on stem cells, but I'm not saying all of you tomorrow should go and do that. I just want you to get this perspective. And if it works for you, then do it. But if it doesn't, great. You learn about it and then you move on. So I think for yourself, for me, is the most important thing. And not education in the classic sense of like, let me tell you what stem cells are and why they're good for you. It's more, let me give you a broad range of understandings and knowledge, and then let you empower yourself with choice and try combinations. And if one thing works, do more of it. And if you do
Right.
less of it and nothing changes, then don't do it anymore, and then go on to the next thing. But that's mainly
Well, we
it.
know that
Think for
human
yourself is
bodies
so
are inexact, right? I mean, every you like lasagna, you don't, right? So, I mean, we can't all respond the same way, even to the same stimuli. But I do think that humans can be frozen out of listening to the signals they receive, and they're so reliant on what they feel they should be getting out of it that they don't really realize what they are getting out of it. Does that make sense?
absolutely. In one of my closing slides for iSpa, I put a slide up which is, trends are the silent killer in the well-being space. Because look, I know many of the people who write them, and I love getting a good report and reading it. And I find there's an art in writing trend reports. But we really spend half of our time in our consultancies dispelling the misconceptions about trends.
Mm. What do you
Can
think
you
the
hear me, or do you want me to repeat?
misconceptions
Because I can
are
tell.
around trends that you need to dispel? Is it the trend itself? Yeah, there was a lag. I was asking what the misconceptions are around trends. Is it the trend itself, or is it the way people feel like they must be feeling that, and what's wrong with me if I'm not feeling it?
Yeah. As I was saying, like, we spend half of our time dispelling trends. And I genuinely mean it, because You have these well-being directors in hospitality environments that grab a stack of reports. And in those reports, you have this is the year of, and then pick a word, breath work. This is the year of hyperbaric. This is the year of. And it's obviously very useful to understand who is doing what where. These are case studies that can support the curse of choice that we have in the well-being industry. You know, we have like a Netflix effect. You keep scrolling, 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 and you're not sure what to pick.
Mhm.
And I often advise to spend more time simulating in the next 5 years. Longer than that is delusion. How people will eat, how will they pray, how will they connect, where do they perceive health, how do they bathe, and trying to paint a full picture of that
Mm.
guest and embodying ourselves into how they're going to behave on a daily basis, much more than using trend reports to go, what do we need in 2026? Because nothing will change from this year till next year. It's not that reactive. And so that's why it's important to bring a psychologist, a biologist, a designer, an architect, like interview a lot of people who live in the supply chain and to help us understand like how will these guests evolve and then what do we think we're going to build for them so we don't change it and retrofit in 1 or 2 years. So definitely like not ignoring trend reports, but I would say not taking them to face value, like a big pinch of salt, I would say is really important.
Why are we so obsessed with trend reports anyway? I mean, every January, that's all we get, and I always wonder why do we need to sum it up in 5 bullet points? What about the human mind is attracted to that? Do you know?
It's a really good question, actually. I think the brain loves to find patterns. And maybe it's as simple as that. We don't like the unknown. We want to always find a way to decipher it. And that could be trend reports or it could be going to a psychic. And probably those are the two same things flipped on their own back. Because we want to know that we're not the first to make a mistake. You know what they say? No one wants to be the first to do something. Everybody wants to be the second. So that somebody else makes the mistake for you and then you come in next. But I think there will be a definite shift in the industry because we're noticing more and more that the year of something is not happening. If last year says the year of breath work and you see around you, well, nothing really changed. I think we're backpedaling a little bit and going, well, maybe I need a longer term well being strategy with my own internal KPIs. And then every 6 months, I try something new, I put it in the hands of my guests, and I see the market signals. And if those are working, I continue. And if they're not, I try to adapt or to pivot away from what's happening. And that for me is the way that we started working the last handful of years. I admit that well-being directors tend to be a little bit isolated. I had a big slide as well on this, showing that they're a little bubble by themselves, almost
Mhm.
far away from the rest of the hotel group, because everybody's looking at them going, so what are we doing in terms of wellness?
Right.
And they're like, I need to be more resourced because well-being directors need to be able to influence design, influence food and beverage, influence the amenities, even influence their own marketing. And often the spa director or the well-being director are not even allowed to do the marketing for their own value prop. And so we need to
Mhm.
bring them more as a horizontal in the business as opposed to a vertical. Like when we work in our practice, when we design a vehicle, design a space, design an app, we see well-being as a horizontal. It's not a field. It's a way to do things inside other spaces. Like well-being can be a methodology that can be designed into a vehicle. It doesn't need to be just a vertical that builds cars. And so I think we
Mm.
need to resource our well-being directors and give them more teams, give them more influence, and allow them to come in early in the conversation to influence design and the programming, the language. And if we don't, then obviously they're going to be limited in what they can influence in the business.
I love the concept of long-term well-being strategies, but that's a more difficult commercial application, isn't it? I mean, whether you're in a hotel spa or a destination spa or just, your local spa where you might see guests one time or a few times, it's very difficult to influence long-term behavior. Do you have any strategies
Mhm.
for that for people listening who operate in those spaces?
I do. Um, it's not an answer directly to your question, but it's an approach that we champion very deeply. I believe we need to be a little bit ambidextrous. And what I mean by that is We have one arm of the business that is looking into foresight, looking down the future and putting these long-term assumptions and seeing how we're going to influence individuals. But then the other arm is doing short-term experiments, learning and iterating and changing things as we go. When we worked with Equinox Hotels to help design their sleep program, they have a lot of ideas of where the world's going, and they have a lot of ideas of what a bedroom can do. And there's a long roadmap of innovations that exist. But what I loved about that process is every 6 months we're trying something. So the cycles of innovation are short because we try something in terms of circadian light, AI generated soundscapes, pre sleep rituals, breath work, whatever it is. And then we put them in the hands of guests and they can give us quick feedback. And then we see the difference between our perceived guest value and the real value.
Mhm.
So the long term strategy won't change there because we're saying we believe that guests want us to transform their sleep, not just give them a good night's sleep. That's the long term.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
then these smaller cycles around it can change and they can keep feeding this the strategy. So it's adjusting in real time as it goes. And I think that's the best we can do because the alternative to that, which I've seen in other groups, let's say 3, 4 years ago, is that you make these mock-up rooms. They're beautiful, fancy mock-up rooms, and you're designing and changing and iterating. And by the time you put them out in 3, 4 years, the guests you designed for are not the same people anymore because the design
Mhm.
2019 and 2025 are such different years, and I'm not the same human I was back then. And so that for me is the ambidexterity that I'm mentioning. Long-term planning and functional iterations of innovation that keep feeding that strategy on a daily basis.
Well, that is a good recipe. It's just difficult in a large organization. Sometimes they move slower. But you have better luck in a smaller company or a company that has one facility to really adopt a strategy like that. Ramy, you've talked also about the democratization of these transformation efforts and how sometimes in the current business landscape they're available at very high prices in very exclusive places. What can we do about that to make them accessible to more people?
In the Arctic, somebody asked Dave Asprey, what can we do to democratize longevity? And the answer was nothing. And I laughed because I know somehow it's partially true for now. I believe one of the fascinating aspects of artificial intelligence is it will democratize it. I know we have this, again, very binary conversation. Is AI good? Is it bad? I believe it's the intentionality we infuse into it. There are more and more artificial intelligence platforms that are leveraging our knowledge of longevity and allowing people, again, to make their own choices. So even if the education becomes at scale, you know, a few knew a lot before, and now a large number of people have the ability to tap into amazing knowledge via artificial intelligence. So that for me is the first layer of it. The second aspect is during our research collaboration and innovation piece with Therm. So Therm have 4 to 5 million guests that go through their facilities every year.
It's
And they
amazing the
expect,
numbers they do.
it's incredible. And they expect triple that, I believe, in the next handful of years. So when you're working with millions of people, and usually the joke we make is it's people that do not care about wellness. Like they're coming to have a good time, they want to lay down, beautiful palm trees, sunshine, drinks. The challenge there has been how do you design experiences to get them to care? And that's been an amazing challenge, an amazing learning. So when we designed, for instance, this planetary breathing experience with the Therm in Germany, it was an experience that allowed you to breathe in and breathe out with the full planetary rhythm. So you saw the Earth rotating in front of you, and you breathe in the daytime and you breathe out in the nighttime. It's a beautiful, awe-inducing experience. There's a meditation about your breath and how it goes out of you into the earth and it comes back to you. So really beautiful experience. And the aim there was to see, can we get people who don't care about breath work to have the experience of like, wow, my breath is such a powerful tool. And I never thought about it that way. And that might be an obvious notion to us in the wellness industry that have done Wim Hof or holotropic breathing or. And then we help build an app for them where you can go on the app after you do the experience and you can sign up to this breathing program. And so the balance between the two is you can come into the space, have an awe-inducing experience, connect to your breath, and then you can go home and go on the app. It's a subscription-based app with hundreds of thousands of users at the moment. And you can start using it on a daily basis. And so it's fascinating because there will be millions of people who will pass through these facilities and have these moments of awe and then continue at home. And the digital well-being tools are very easy. They're very cheap compared to obviously like building a space. And so I believe really in this phygital model, this relationship between physical space and the online practice that you can do at home. And to add more to it, like when we worked with Calm, with Sleep Cycle, and many apps like that, there's a moment where you drop your practice, 8 to 12 weeks. I don't know where the numbers are,
Mm.
because you're doing a breathing experience or a sound experience in front of a wall or in your room. There's a limit to how much the engagement can go. But I believe that in the hospitality world, you can go to a spa, have a peak moment, go home, continue your practice until it drops. You can go back to the spa and it increases again. So can the physical space act as a space for you to connect to yourself and understand, like, I deserve healing, and learn the tools for that healing? And then you go home and you continue that practice until the next time you come back. And I believe that model can scale because you're able to influence, again, millions of people that come and have an experience, and then they continue that practice at home.
That's really good. I mean, the question it raises for me is that there are so many options between technology and simple things like you said, breath work. We breathe all day. We don't think about it, but we all own it. It's very democratic. We can all work on our breath. How do
Exactly.
we choose as businesses which thing to focus on? Or do we just try everything and see what sticks, right? Throwing it all on the wall and seeing what sticks. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about businesses that want to have a positive transformative effect on their guests, but they have limited resources. Which ways that we've talked about music and touch and sight, and which ways do you think are most impactful?
So we have something in the studio that we call the rule of one, and that's our almost non-negotiable red line when we're working with especially big groups that have the resources, that have the scale, that have the portfolio. And the rule of one is pick one thing. You're not allowed as a hotel, in our view at least, to do sleep and social wellness and fitness. And look, I understand wellness is holistic and it's important to touch all of these aspects. But if we're learning how to develop our value prop, I believe in Equinox succeeds because they go, we're going to be the best at sleep. And if you're a bathhouse and you believe your audience and community is social, be the best at social bathing. And then slowly add other things. But I think like doing one thing and doing it really well helps to combat trends. But B, it allows the well-being director and his team to understand like this is our long-term North Star. And when a
Mhm.
consumer has too much choice between you and the app they use and the third space they love and where their friends go, like you're not competing just with other hospitality players. You're competing with the whole city. You're competing with the person's inner world. There's so much
Mm.
that overrides your value prop. But if in their mind they go, when I think of you, I think of sleep, or when I think of you, I think of making friends and having a sweat, then it's easy for them to go, yeah, I'm going to come to you because it's a very clear value prop. So I'm a big believer in choosing one thing and deepening into it, because the next year will be the year of something else. And you're like, yeah, but it's not my thing. Plus, it's about sleep and I'm doing sleep. The rest for me is noise. The only signal is the one thing that we're doing and doing it very well. So I would say absolutely. The only way not to do too much is by doing little and just doing one thing.
Right. Subtraction. Just drill down to the one thing you can do reliably, you can produce results and do that really well.
Exactly. And the discipline is complex. When you think of sleep, it's a whole universe to go into. When you think of recovery, there's so much of recovery to work on. So I really believe if you have multiple things on the table and you don't know what to do with them, choose one.
Okay. Great. I'm going to ask for your last bit of advice, Ramy, for spa owners or managers listening to this conversation about something that they could do to further their efforts in transforming their guests. Is it to use technology? Is it to find the one thing in your brand? Is it to think about ritual design? Like what is the thing they should most focus on for the near future anyway?
So absolutely not coming into it with the belief that technology has the answers for it. I know I mention technology often because it's a big part of our practice, but I've been off social media for 7 years and I'm a person who loves being offline. So I love this balance in my life. I'm a big believer in this notion of when you're designing a practice, I understand that some people think they have all the team and all the resources in house. And I'm not saying come and hire us. This is not a long London marketing piece. I think it's important to bring external voices into your space. And these voices don't have to be wellness, they don't have to be longevity, but they can give you an outside perspective to your business. Even if you're a big group, there's a possibility to be nimble by bringing an external person and picking one or two people in the practice who do innovation, and then they can act as a startup within a larger group. Because I get it, when you're a big portfolio and you have thousands of environments and assets, it's so hard to move this beast. It's so big, it's so dense. And so you can have a startup that lives inside this ecosystem that is experimenting on the go. And every year they say, look, we're going to do month, what is the feedback from the clientele? Because I'm not a believer in a culture of perfection. I'm a big believer in a culture of experimentations. The reason why we have so much choice is because humans are evolving so fast. We're not able to keep up both on a personal level and on a professional level. And so to keep up with them, we need to experiment along the way and see, is the circadian lighting thing a fad? Then we just kill it. Or no, actually, this is a big basis for our chronobiology as individuals. So that becomes a permanent facet of the design that we use. But if we, again, back to the mock-up example, if you wait for too long, people will evolve and they won't be the same individuals that you were designing for in the same space. And in spa specifically, we've designed immersive wellness experiences. We're doing at the moment two, I wouldn't call them temples, two spiritual spaces that have no technology in them.
That's great advice. I think especially for spas that have a regular clientele, if something's not working, you need to move on. But you do want to appear to be innovative and always trying new things without confusing the guests. That's always a fine line to walk to. They want to know what they're getting for the investment they're making in your business, but they also want a little bit of something new every time. So that's the key, I guess, a little bit at a time and test, 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 as you said, and then respond. And it's free, right? They're already your customers, so you might as well ask them. I think your point about new perspectives is really one I want to focus on in the closing moment here because Ramy, you are not from the wellness industry, one would say. You didn't come up in hospitality or work in spas or a trained therapist, and yet you have been able to bring that viewpoint into our industry and make an impact because you don't have the lens of how we've always done it, and I think that's your point about having new voices. I think the message is that as humans, we need to make sure we're not stuck in one silo and to read and consume different media or foods or experiences, whatever, so that we broaden our perspectives and we don't become so rigid. Well, we're learning to live in a world that is flatter than ever, right? All the different cultures and experiences and rituals are blending together and we have to be open to them and then build on them for our own well-being, right? That's the idea. Well, we can't wait to see what you're up to. Ramy Elnagar, Wellbeing Innovation Strategist and founder of White Mirror. Thank you so much for joining us. If anyone listening wants to learn more about White Mirror, you can find them at whitemirror.studio, based in the UK, but taking over the world. Thanks again, Ramy, for taking the time to talk with us today on StarrCast.